In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the pergola in a sort of very basic manner. I've shown one in here. It's a four-post pergola, and then I've also shown the outline of the outer edge of the pergola. It typically hangs over the post approximately 2 feet. So for now, it's a rough image of where you want to place it. I wouldn't worry too much about the framing underneath and how it's to be supported. We'll be talking about that in future lessons. But before we move on to the CAD portion of the lesson, what I want to do is demonstrate to you some of the different pergolas that are out there, because you have to do some research. Like anything else, until we have a better understanding of all the parts and pieces, we can't really draw them. We need to do some more exploratory work in that area to really define what it is that we're talking about when we're looking at a pergola. So first of all, I want to start off here. Here's an example. This particular pergola is not an acceptable pergola. This is a timber frame pergola. We're not going to be working with this. And timber frame structures are typically 12 by 12 or greater. These members in here are 4 by 8. The Ontario Building Code doesn't allow for this type of calculation. You'd actually have to be a structural engineer who focuses on timber frames, and the analysis involved is fairly significant. So we're not going to touch upon this. So we're not going to select this type of pergola. I mention this because quite often people draw pergolas like this, where the ceiling joists are these massive pieces, and same with the beams, but we're not going to be touching anything like that in this particular portion of the program. Sorry about that. I just lost my imagery there for a minute. Let me just pull it back up in the file. There we go. So that's where I wanted to start first. But let's start at the beginning here with some of the different designs and what the different elements actually are. So this is your typical pergola. It is something that has occasionally a brace, as what's shown here. I don't think I can highlight anything here, but I'll give it a shot. There we go. That looks pretty brutal though, so I won't use that. It has a brace. A pergola has two directions. It has a strong direction and a weak direction. Now I say that only because it refers to the actual methods of support. So this here along here is the beam. And the members that go across this way in here are the ceiling joists, and you can see them as I sort of sketch on top of here. So these guys that are up here are the ceiling joists, and these guys are the beams, and we'll look at the different calculations for those. It's very similar to deck, and that's something that we've already done. So this member here is a brace, and that brace is actually a structural brace. Structural braces only exist with beams. If you see a brace going in the other direction, like here you don't, like if you saw a brace here, that'd be a decorative brace. And in this case, we don't have one because, you know, it's made properly. So this one would be considered two bays. Each of these bays from post A to post B can't be any greater than about 15 feet maximum. I'd like you to keep between 12 and 14 because the calculations are easy. And same within the direction, in the opposite direction. So each of these squares is somewhere around 12 foot by 12 foot, or 12 foot by 14 foot, or 14 foot by 14 foot, somewhere in that range. And that will make for the Ontario Building Code calculations to be very simple to do. Now this is a covered pergola. We're going to be working with an open one. This really is simply a sheet, whether it be canvas or otherwise, that is a temporary cover. It could not carry the snow loads that we have in Canada. So we don't use this type of device over the winter time. It would only be installed over the summer to provide some additional shading for somebody below. This also has a decorative base, which simply means it's covering the joint that's down there, because remember, some of the metal work that supports this is not exactly attractive. So we try to use different methods to be able to cover it. This is one method that's being used to cover that. All right, so that is a double bay. This is a simple single bay pergola. Now remember what I mentioned to you before in terms of structure. So this along here is the beam. Okay, these along here are the ceiling joists, and those along there are simply decorative lattice. And then again, a suspended type of canopy to provide additional shading. Only a beam can be braced. So there's a brace here and there's a brace there, and that will actually provide support to the structure. This brace is basically decorative. It does nothing. So we can only brace the beam, or in this case a lintel. Lintel is a 2-ply. We don't brace the ceiling because it makes no sense to do that. It's simply decorative. And then we attach this joint in here several different ways. I've got some images that I'm going to show you. This is a very poor attachment because it's simply slapped onto the side of the post. What we really want to do is notch in those sections and allow the lintel pieces or the beam portions of it to rest on the actual post itself rather than, I got all these things coming up, sorry about that, rather than on the sides of it. This design requires that the actual beam or the support mechanism, in that case the actual bolt that runs through there, carry all the shear weight, which simply means the weight of the ceiling is resting on the beam, and the beam is transferring that weight through a single bolt into the actual post. So it's not a very good construction technique. Once again, at the bottom, they've hidden how the junction looks just by putting some casing around it and making it a bit more decorative. Here is something where they've really decorated the post itself. The post is still the same. It's probably a 6x6 that sits through the middle of this. So the rest of this is simply for looks. So it's layer upon layer of different materials that are then mitered, and they've got decorative finishes and edges that are just overlaid onto the post to hide the connections. Now this post may actually be connected at the top of this column, or what it can actually do is run right to the ground level, and then all of this surrounding material is simply applied around the post as a decorative image. There is our beam. It's the lower member here, and therefore this is a structural brace. Notice there's no brace in this direction. And then there's your ceiling joist. And then the top layer in here is simply decorative lattice work. And the decorative lattice work provide additional shading. You can see the shading down here. It's not absolute. It's simply additional to the project. And it may provide just enough to break up the light that's coming through in opposed to in exception to putting in some sort of canvas work or things of that nature. This will allow us to actually create something that would last all winter long, and therefore we don't have to remove it. So the next example I've got in here, this project in here is using the new decorative types of supports, and so they're exposing them everywhere here. So they're now available at Home Hardware, Home Depot, and they meet code requirements. Once again, this is a structural brace because there is your beam or your lintel in here. This post support or this frame support is far better than a bolt supporting that in place. This brace is strictly decorative. See, you can see it here. Now they've repeated this kind of look with a double member above this one, but really structurally it does absolutely nothing. It's for looks only. It's a double bay beam. Now my concern here is that this is a very thick piece, and it's decorative in the sense that I don't see an attachment. There's usually some sort of, sorry about that. No. There's some sort of attachment here that would actually show, whether it be dowels that are basically pounded right through all the members. So a hole is drilled, and then a 1-inch diameter maple dowel is then glued and pounded through the hole, and that would provide support. There's nothing here that would show any kind of support. So even though it looks like it's structural, it actually may be decorative in nature. I'm not too sure. And then this one here is a very, very simple application. You can actually see the bolts here. This is a really poor type of pergola design. You can see that they did not protect the base. It's already rotting. It's a solid post with 2 bolts that run through here, and therefore all the weight that's on the ceiling and the beam is running through the bolts. Basically, we call this shear loads because it's cutting through the bolt. So these bolts in here have significant amount of weight being transferred from one to the other. It's not a very good design. And you can see, like I said, with the base being attached right to the ground, it's rotting already. It's got a very simple chamfer edge to it, which again is something that I kind of shy away from because it's too basic for the type of project that we're working on here. And then we're looking at the next one here, which was the timber frame. So your research project basically is to find a pergola design that you like. And then once you find a design that you like, you're going to use that as your base example that you'll then try to produce in CAD. For now, the only thing I need to know is how far apart are each one of these posts and how big are these posts going to be when you actually work with the project. Now, we're guessing, and in my particular case, I did just that. Let me just minimize this. It's not cooperating. Hold on, I got to switch from my pointer to my mouse here, and now it seems to do the trick. And in here, in the CAD drawing that I've got, what I'm basically doing here is showing where those posts are. So that's what your research is. The outer edge is the overhang of the beam and the ceiling joist, and you're just dotting that in for now. And that will give us an idea of sort of the outer edge of that pergola. Eventually what we're going to do is work through complete pergola drawings. So when I'm going to move to L3 just to show you where we're going to go with this. We're going to define how the pergola sits on the existing structure. I've got 3 different scenarios here for you. This example will be available to you. The pergola sitting on the existing beams, the pergola sitting on its own, and then the pergola offset from an existing beam. Those are the 3 possible conditions that we could have a pergola on a deck. And then we have the top view of the pergola with the post. We'll look at the sectional view with all the different beam configurations. So here's the pergola on an independent post, missing the beam that's already there. Here's a pergola post that's actually sitting on the beam that's part of the decking. And then the third condition where it is offset. And we'll talk about all those conditions and make reference to it. We'll talk about a key plan, how it actually sits on our project. And we're also going to be looking at some of the details. So here's where I'm showing you how the actual lintel sits on a notched edge of the post. So all the weight transfers directly down as opposed to being slapped onto the side, which basically doesn't have any support whatsoever, and you're counting on the bolts holding all this together to transfer all the load. Here I'm showing where the dowels go, how to actually create a decorative brace. So these are things you're going to be researching right now. And then I've actually shown a cut pattern, a pattern that would actually be used as a template to cut all the edge and treatments that will be on the lintel as well as the ceiling joist, and then how the actual design and the cut of the braces and how it's to be installed with the maple dowel. And like I said, this drawing will be available to you so that you can actually make reference to it to the level of notes, the dimensions, and everything else, but obviously you're not copying this. So for now, your lesson is to do your research on the pergola. And as part of the framing, like I said here, I've shown where the 4 posts are. I've also blocked in the posts. Now, I've tried to create a slightly more difficult scenario where my posts are diagonal, or I should say at a 45-degree angle to the blocking. So the blocking is a bit more unique. If you have your pergola running in the same direction as the floor joist, then the blocking is a bit simpler. So some of the blocking is basically additional joists that are put in place. Now I show them overlapping because I'm actually going to notch the post so that the blocking secures tightly along a side and then it gets secured into the sides. So that's just providing what we call lateral support. So the base of the post won't move and it's tied directly into the decking surface. You'll be doing the same thing, only if you rotate this 45 degrees, then all the sides are flat and you don't have to show this notch, which I've done here. So I've shown a slightly more complex type of Pergola, just so that you're aware of that this is possible to do. And mine is 12-foot centers in one direction and slightly more than that, 13 feet, a couple of inches in the other direction. And so after midterms, we're going to go and start looking at how do we design this? How do we actually put it together? What are the footing details? What are the connection details? And how a pergola is actually designed and put into CAD.